Hi guys, I'm here at NAB 2014 here in wonderful Las Vegas, Nevada. We're sitting here in the Mirage Hotel and we're right on the heels of an event, a Sony press event where they announced something pretty interesting to us photographers, and it was this thing. So it's the new Sony A7S, and I'm here with El-Deane, Nuade. Did I pronounce it right?
That is absolutely correct.
I got it right.
Got 100%.
All right, I practiced in my head.
Yeah, good.
and then Lennie, he's here also. So El-Deane, you're at Sony, and you're a Sony employee.
Correct, yes.
And you had something to do with the rollout of this thing. So what's your position at Sony and all that?
So I'm the Senior Product Information Manager for Sony in the United States.
Okay.
And part of my responsibilities are to work on the launch team that launches products. It's a big team of people, well, not that big, but my primary responsibilities as the product information manager is getting the product information out, which is essentially, rewriting features and specs and making sure that everything is understandable to the end consumer that the product's intended for, and then to distribute that to everybody from our retailers. And
so we got the right person here then.
I hope so.
So you know everything there is to know about this camera. So.
Yeah, enough. I didn't get a lot of lead time on it, but yeah, I think I know.
Okay. So you're
others.
So I'm positioning this as you're an inside man.
Yep.
Then you were out in the field. You got the chance to get some hands-on time with this thing before today, right? And
yeah,
you actually did some substantive work with it.
Yeah.
So we're going to get kind of an inside and outside look at this camera. So let's start with it. So this is the A7S here, right? And we have some images floating up on the screen behind us here. So A7S. It looks like the A7 and the A7R. Is it the same body?
Pretty much. It's very, very close to the same body. It's very much the same size and weight. There are slight differences in the bodies, even between the A7 and the A7R, and a lot of people don't realize that there's little minor differences. But when you put them side by side with each other, most people couldn't even tell. But for the most part, you could say it's an identical body to both of those cameras, which then also makes it the world's lightest and smallest DSLR style camera. In other words, an interchangeable lens camera, but this is a mirrorless.
And it's full frame, right?
Full frame.
Yeah.
That's the big deal.
Yeah, and that was a big deal about the A7 and the A7R when they came out. It was just, holy crap, you know?
How do you get something full frame in something this small?
Right, and that was a lot of objection from a lot of full frame DSLR shooters. They're like, yeah, I hear about this mirrorless thing a lot, but I'm not moving to it because I don't want to go to a smaller sensor, right?
Correct.
And then Sony came in with this, and now the excuses have been reduced. Right?
Yeah, and if you have a look in the market of sensors, you have the interchangeable lens cameras or the mirrorless cameras that have 1-inch sensors. Micro Four Thirds is the next step up. You almost double that size, and you go to APS-C, and then you go much bigger than that, and you go to full frame. And as you know, the bigger the sensor, the better the light sensitivity of the camera.
Right.
So you could have 3 different cameras with 3 different size sensors, and they can all be the same megapixel. But if you have a 24 and a 24 and a 24, as you go to a bigger sensor, the bigger the sensor, the bigger the pixels, the better light sensitivity, which means the camera can perform a lot better and not only reduce the amount of grain or noise that you find in images in low light situations, but you could also shoot at higher ISOs with less noise, or lower ISOs with faster shutter speeds. So it allows you to eliminate a lot of the issues that you would have with a smaller sensor by having a bigger sensor. So putting a really massive sensor in such a small camera is kind of a technology, leap and bound ahead.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna dive into the specs of this a little bit more in a second. Then, so like I said before, you had hands-on with this guy here, right? So first of all, what keeps you busy during the week? I know you're a DP and you do all kinds of stuff. So tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of modern entrepreneurial filmmaker, really. I produce, I shoot, I edit, I grade. My career was very much as a television cameraman, a broadcast television cameraman. About 5 years ago, I set up F-Stop Academy when the first DSLR thing kicked off with Vincent and Philip and I did a few things. Philip Bloom and I did a few things together. The business is always evolving as the market has been evolving in the last few years, and as more photographers migrate into motion. We have a series of hands-on workshops that we do, and we're seeing increasing numbers of photographers coming to those classes here saying, I want to learn how to shoot. Sure. So I have an online film school. We do online content. I have live workshops, and I produce corporate films, predominantly for the broadcast industry, but I do a bit of work in the music industry. I do stuff with some big artists. We did a big thing with Duran Duran a couple of years ago.
Cool.
So a real mixture of stuff. So it keeps me kind of fresh in the field, but I get really excited when I get to do things like this with Sony.
Well, you took this thing out. You know, you're on a very short list, I'm sure, of maybe one or two that got their hands on this thing.
Yeah.
What were your initial impressions? And had you played with the A7 before?
Not really. No, okay. I mean, I actually had an NEX5N a few years ago, and I really loved how small that was. And you know, I have an F5, and I work with some bigger cameras and bigger lenses as well. But there's nothing greater than having a small form factor camera and a small lens that you can literally put anywhere. And I think what is so appealing about this camera is that, I mean, it's tiny.
Yeah.
We had to do some comparisons a couple of days ago with the 5D Mark III in one of these, and you don't realize how big the 5D Mark III is until you put this next to it, and it's half the size and half the weight. So, you know, something you can carry, something that's small is always great, but it's absolutely packed with features. You know, the low light sensitivity, I think it does 500,000 ISO.
Yeah, I saw that.
So in complete darkness, you can get images.
Yeah,
so
people say a black cat in a dark room, right?
Right.
Yeah.
and if you're working in news and current affairs where getting the story is more important than anything else, this will allow you to do that. But come down the ISO, and you've got this beautiful, clean, very, very subtle images with great resolution, great detail. Nothing's over sharp, nothing's over saturated. The actual native standard gamma in the camera is very, very beautiful. And I always measure as a DP the camera's ability to resolve skin tones.
Right.
And I was very, very impressed, both in standard gamma, and for any of the filmmakers who might be watching this, it has a new gamma called S-Log2, which is pulled in from the more high-end professional cameras that Sony produce, camcorders. So S-Log2 is a log function which allows you to kind of really extend dynamic range down into the shadows, up into the highlights, and then you grade those files afterwards. So it was a very interesting camera to use, very intuitive camera to use. I'm not a very technical guy, you know. I produce images. I don't know the specs.
You're an image maker, like the rest of us.
I just produce nice work. It performed very well in the situations we put it into. We made a couple of films for Sony, actually. We made one in Scotland, in a traditional fish smoking environment where we were smoking fish on a beach, and then some of these really dirty, dark old smoke houses. And I wanted to do that so we could shoot out and see daylight and resolve detail outside, but also try and resolve as much detail into the shadows as we could. And that was very interesting. So very, very good dynamic range. Found it very useful when we were filming inside this boat. We had, you know, the sky and the clouds being resolved and the highlights on the ocean being resolved, but still resolving beautiful skin tones inside on the shadow side.
That's a holy grail. A lot of photographers I know, still photographers, of course, they'll go out and they'll do multiple images, right? So you'll take one, almost like a, not HDR, but, you know, expose for the highlights and expose for the shadows, bring them together in Photoshop, put a gradient mask on there. Now I have an image, and you're telling me with this guy, you can capture that latitude in one shot.
Right, and of course, you know, when you're talking about filmmaking, and for any of the folks that are watching this who are thinking about migrating or very much on the cusp of migrating, and you know, you can't stitch images together in motion. You've got to get it in one take on camera. So having a sensor and the processing and a gamma curve that you can use that can actually handle the extremes of dynamic range is very impressive. So it was a real joy to use. We had it, because of its small size, you can actually start to use really nice high-end filmmaking tools like UAVs, you know, drones, these devices with 8-blade copters that you can put a camera like this on with a free steady gimbal.
Because it's light enough,
Light enough. And we did some beautiful aerial shots to open the film. And we had it on a free-flying gimbal as well. So, you know, it's small, it's compact.
But then who's this guy for? So, you know, at the press conference, I'm looking at all these amazing cameras that Sony's coming out with and that they have out. And as a still photographer primarily, I'm looking at them like, wow, those are amazing cameras. Even the cameras that we're shooting this interview with, I'm looking at them like, this is some amazing stuff. But then my head goes to the place, okay, who should I be thinking about getting one of those, investing in that, or should I go into this line? How do you know what's for you?
You see, that's a really good segue to have a look at how Sony's really advanced in the industry, especially when it comes to full-frame cameras. And we have a line of full-frame cameras, and I think we've done a really good job at segmenting the market for particular users. So when you have a look at full-frame video, we had the VG900, The A99, which is full-fledged DSLR style camera. Then we came out with the RX1 as well at the same time as that, which is the probably the world's best point and shoot, bar none. Full frame, 35mm sensor in a really tiny little camera. Now that camera is really great for street shooters. It's very inconspicuous. It's super high resolution. There's a number of wedding photographers actually even using that as a wedding photography camera, which is amazing. The A99, I would say, is the traditional DSLR user. And then you have a look at the A7 range of cameras that we've just announced, right? So the A7R, which is the highest resolution, but doesn't have phase detection on for autofocus. And I would say that's a very purpose-built full-frame camera, right? So the A7R is 36 megapixels. That's somebody who wants to shoot that Ansel Adams type,
it's a landscape
grandeur landscape, maybe an architectural photographer, or somebody who's looking for a tremendous amount of detail out of an image with 36 megapixels, 14-bit RAW.
It's almost like the medium format of small, and it's that kind of mindset where you're going to put it on sticks, you're going to think about the shot, get everything ready, and click.
Correct. So I would say that is a purpose camera meant for purposeful shots. And then you have a look at the A7, which is a 24 megapixel camera, but it has phase detection on sensor and it focuses really fast. It's got unbelievable resolution. 24 megapixels is still nothing to sneeze at, but it's got phase detection on the sensor and it focuses faster. It's great in low light, and it's kind of that dual purpose camera, and it's really the camera that probably fits most people. Most people I think are going to be in the A7 range. Having a look at the A7S now, this is taking it to the opposite extreme. This is taking it down to 12.2 megapixels. Now they all have the exact same size full frame sensor, but coming down to 12.2 megapixels means that each individual pixel is that much larger. Each individual pixel is almost 3 times larger than any other pixel that's really out there. And what the larger pixel does is gives you greater light sensitivity. So this is really the camera that a lot of low light shooters are going to be looking for. People who want to take, so for the still photographer who wants to take low light, shots, there's nothing that would beat this in my opinion, right? But then on the flip side, 12 megapixels is also optimized for video. So when you're having a look at, QFHD or, even HD compression, that has to take a larger megapixel and compress it down into 1920 by 1080 is about a 2 megapixel, and you have a look at 4K compresses down to about 8 megapixels. It's you're not losing much in compression. And you literally almost going pixel to pixel when you're talking about this camera when it goes when you're capturing 4K, for instance, you're almost shooting pixel for pixel. And with a direct pixel readout, every single pixel is read without any line skipping. So it's the only camera that, in the world, I think, that does, that has a full frame sensor that reads the full width of the sensor. Every single pixel will read, even for 4K shooting. That's crazy. So I would say this is, as you start on the higher end, landscape super resolution, coming down to the low light videographer. Somebody who wants the best of both worlds is, this is probably the camera that's
well, one of the, you mentioned 4K, so one of the big features of this guy is the fact that it shoots 4K.
Correct.
And for both of you, I want to put this to you. So we were talking about sort of the still photographer's migratory path into video, and one of the holy grails in that migratory path is being able to shoot 4K video and harvest frames out of that video that are usable and saleable. Are we there yet?
I think so, absolutely. When you have a look at companies like Red, you go to their website and they show a lot of fashion magazine covers and things like that were basically still grabs out of 4K. That's absolutely possible. And now that you have something that could shoot 4K and get a still grab out of it, I can see people in the fashion industry or people shooting, because you don't need that great, you're not going to blow up a billboard out of, a magazine cover. And I can see guys, going out and shooting rolling video and working with a model or working with a subject.
See, that's crazy. I mean, that's crazy.
And then stop it and then, play through that content, find the frame that you want and grab that frame out.
But also, don't you think nowadays with so much digital advertising, the idea of print is kind of diminishing. So if you're able to record a 4K image, then you need less output resolution to feed a digital display.
Absolutely,
and I think what it does, it offers. I always talk this in my classes to photographers about this should be seen as an opportunity to make more money. because you can offer your clients stills and motion at the same time, and offer additional post-production services and archiving services and all sorts of things that I really think these. Initially, when the DSLRs hit, a lot of photographers were very apprehensive about going near motion. And I think now that we're getting cameras like the A7S with a 4K full sensor readout, you're opening up amazing business opportunities as a photographer, as an image maker, to allow the motion to occur. It
changes the dynamic. You know, I'm thinking like from a fashion photographer standpoint. The traditional method has been lights, camera, click, okay, move, click, yeah, I love that, more motion, click, you know, that kind of cadence going on. And if we're moving towards the, I'm just going to capture the entire segment, then in post later I will find that frame. Now the photographer is rolling and directing and saying, okay, look a little bit more, okay, now turn around, now spin, okay, yeah, now do this. And then later he can go back in and pull those frames. We're there now, you guys are saying. We're at that point where you could do that.
I think this is the cusp. I think we're pretty much there. I think this is where things really start, you know, accelerating into that direction going forward. You know. And the camera doesn't just stop there, you know, it allows you to shoot in multiple formats. So, you know, being able to capture 4K through the external HDMI, that's one thing, but also being able to shoot, you know, 3 different formats in HD. You know, you've got MP4, which is, you know, ideal for web use. If that's all you're going to shoot, that option is available to you, and then you don't have to be so proficient in post-production or anything like that.
Transcode all the footage.
Exactly, exactly. You just you know, drag and drop the MP4 file and you're done. Sure. AVC HD, as we know, has been a de facto standard in a lot of HD video cameras, and you know, that still exists on this camera. But then you know, this employs the new XAVC-S codec, which allows you to then shoot at 50 megabits per second. Even in HD, and also allows you to shoot at 120 frames a second at 1287 720p basically. You can shoot at 120 frames a second.
Beautiful flowing slow motion.
It's 5 times slow motion. Right? So this really opens up that latitude of 4K for stills, 4K for shooting 4K content, or XAVCS if you want high megabits, and if you know that most broadcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about 48 or 50 megabits per second, right? So this is essentially bringing a camera of this size into broadcast quality standards. Yeah. So
now, Dan, when you look at this camera and you think of your daily workflow, say you put on your DP hat, you're going out there. Yeah. What's a kit? Like, how is your kit going to change now that this thing is available?
I think this is the kind of camera you'd have on your hip doing recce's. Yeah. Pre-production stuff where you could take stills, shoot some video. A lot of my corporate work I shoot on an F5 with lovely Sony Zeiss primes and Zeiss Cine Zooms. Yeah. So I tend to do corporates at quite a high level, but this would become a perfect companion camera as a B camera. And the thing that still blows me away, and I watched the press conference and I saw my work on this massive screen. I went, maybe I actually feel quite emotional we've put a lot of work in the last month into this project. I was in Japan for 4 days last week. We worked very hard to see it on the screen finally, and to think that this 4K image on a massive screen comes from a camera this size is actually hard to comprehend.
It is. It's hard to understand, especially growing up with smaller means lower quality, bigger means higher quality. Right. Now that all those paradigms are gone, which is, I think, a marketing challenge for Sony, right? Because now you have to convince people that you can do some Den style work with this.
Well, a lot of people ask me about that, and they say, so what is better? Because the perception out there is that the bigger your camera, the better. I carry a big 5D, and I must be a professional photographer. Right. Yeah. Maybe so, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Right. What really matters is the large sensor. That's really what matters. Yeah. So in one way, bigger is better. And in this scenario, the bigger sensor is better. Right. But in the second side of it, smaller is better because this makes it so much more versatile. Now that I have this really tiny camera, as you were saying, you could put it on an a drone or UAV. You could go into places where maybe you would need permits to go in previously. Now you can go in and start shooting, and they might not even bother you.
It reminds me of like an old rangefinder camera. One of the things that inspired me to get into photography and image making was the beautiful work of these classic Magnum photographers. They'd go with a couple of rangefinders, And I think when you're working with people, be it photography or filmmaking, it's all about engaging with your subject and looking them in the eye and getting them to perform for you. And having a big camera to hide behind puts a barrier up emotionally between your character.
And it's intimidating.
It is intimidating, whereas this is much physically smaller. So suddenly you're able to communicate with your subject in a much more direct way. And the camera's there just working for you. And it's something that's completely overlooked, but I'm all about small is better. Small is beautiful because you can travel lighter and get the camera into positions that you can't get physically larger cameras in.
Yeah. So now we have 3 cameras. We have the A7, A7R, and now the A7S.
A7S.
Right. So now we have a full sort of suite, and they're all, like you were saying, they're targeted at different people. With the A7, more of a general purpose camera. The A7R is more of a considered landscape camera, and then fill in the blank on this guy. So those two are. So
the S on the A7S stands for sensitivity. Okay. So I would say the main thing is whether you're a still shooter or a video shooter. If you need something that's going to have maximum sensitivity, we're talking about 500,000. It's 409,600 ISO.
Yeah, I had on my notes here, which is I saw that on the slide,
which is incredible.
Like,
And I haven't had a lot of time with this camera. I've literally only had half a day with it, and I've been in the shooting down little dark corners and things and looking at images and going, how is that even possible? How is it even possible that it's that clean and that good? So I would say the gap being filled in is sensitivity is the primary purpose for this camera. Very large pixels, high sensitivity. There's a lot of new technology on the sensor as well. There's new gapless lens design. New RGB filter. It has an AR coating to reduce glare and flare. The pixels are closer together, and it really enhances the amount of light and the cleanliness, I guess I could say, of that light, so that that it reduces any amount of noise that could be generated after the image. So if you want that ultra sharp, crisp, clear images without getting those digital sharp edges, that's really what this camera is for. Right.
I couldn't agree more. We did some tests out of my balcony on the Cosmopolitan Hotel last night. We had a 5D Mark III and this camera side by side, just shooting out over the Bellagio fountains. And even at 6400 ISO, the Canon, sadly, was really starting to fall apart. I mean, I think when we show this, people will think that we didn't focus the Canon properly because the resolution drops so rapidly. And the saturation of the camera is just, it's much warmer, a lot more magenta. And so when the highlights start to bleed on the Canon, it happens quite quickly. But you look at the comparison image with the A7S, and you can see the fine lines on the car parking lot. You can see the separation between 2 lights that are very close together. And when you look at the farther afield in some of the hotels down the strip, there's just a resolution. And you're right, that sharp, jagged edge that we're used to is gone. It's a very pleasing image, so it's a clean image with great clarity and very, very low noise. And it's mind-blowing. And the fact that it has these great sensitivities. We filmed in the temple in Japan, in Kochi, and we were at 12,800 ISO. And it was resolving the candles and the lights in the shades.
And it was clean, low noise.
Very clean.
Because that's been the stigma of these ultra-high ISOs that we see in marketing spec sheets. Like, of course, it can do that, but I'm going to have golf ball size grain in there. And you're saying we're not.
It's Sony, ever since they brought out the FS100 and the FS700, which are cameras I've used a great deal, the noise has a...
Which we I
hate to use the kind of phrase organic, but it's the best word I can come up with. The pixels dance. They don't look like electronic noise. It looks like film grain. And so it's very pleasing, and our brain processes that and thinks of it as film grain. So it's not a totally electronic look. And the other thing that I'd really like to make a point of is that I get a lot of people saying to me, oh yeah, but it's a Sony look, it's very video looking. And it's not the case anymore. I think there's a sad legacy out in the marketplace who people think that the Sony make these very overly saturated, high contrast images. And it's just not the case. The skin tone resolving power of this sensor, over and above its high sensitivity and large pixels, in the mid-range where you spend most of your time, does beautiful things with skin tones, both in HD and in 4K.
Right. And then I think one of the other points is, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, it's not just the low sensitivity, it's the high dynamic range.
Right.
So what that gives you is this incredible dynamic range that you wouldn't have before without blowing out highlights. So being able to shoot in any condition. You know, being able to shoot in very bright conditions and really get the best dynamic range, which is typically very difficult for a video camera to do.
Right.
Highlights are really tough. But then, you know, noise and shadow is really difficult as well. So being able to capture that dynamic range expands the ability. And you mentioned focus. You know, because of the sensitivity of the sensor, this camera can actually focus in -4 EV. Yeah. Which makes it incredible for...
It's basically dark.
Pretty much, you know, so being able to shoot in the dark. But the other side of it, besides just being that, is the pro features that have been built into this. You know, the A7S now includes, you mentioned S-Log 2 Gamma. It's got time code, it's got picture profiles, which means if I'm going to be shooting you know, multiple camera shoot, I can set up a picture profile in one camera, and then I could actually save it to a card like we do in our professional higher end cameras, where you can then take that picture profile and move it over to other cameras as well.
Wonderful.
You know, it's really packed with those features that you don't get on a lot of other DSLR style
and
cameras.
audio in and headphone out. And,
they're good.
Micro HDMI 2, so it's, you know, I think it's the first camera in the world to have micro HDMI 2, which is the 4K readout. Using micro HDMI, I mean, it's crazy.
So this is a filmmaker's camera.
It pretty much is, you know, and you have a look at the standard ISO shoe, and a lot of people would look at that and think, okay, that's just, you know, good for flash, as you see behind me right now. You know, this is the standard ISO shoe, but as you look inside there, there's also, you know, there's a little 20 pin, and that allows us to adapt, you know, other audio products on. So we have an XLR audio, and we have a second one in development at the moment. I believe we'll be showing it on the booth at NAB, but the current version, when you clip that in, those pins then give you, you know, true balanced XLR audio through an external XLR box. It's not the type of XLR audio that you plug into a little, you know, 1/8 jack. This is actually proper balanced audio and full controls. Now, one of the things that is new with this camera too is that it doesn't only do the AAC in, you know, the different memory card formats, but if you're shooting 4K to an external recorder, it'll also record linear PCM audio. So, you know, it takes it to that next level of pro features, usability features. There's things like, you know, LCD markers and, you know, barrier lines. You're going to have to help me out with the proper terminology.
I mean, it really is an indie filmmaker's camera.
Correct. Yeah, that's probably a really good way.
It's an indie filmmaker's camera. You know, it's. I mean, there's no pricing announced yet, but I'm taking a stab that Sony are going to price it in that kind of indie filmmaking kind of market. I guess around about the 5D Mark III kind of market is probably who I think they're probably going for. Is
that who you're taking aim at? The 5D crowd? That you guys.
I would absolutely say. I mean,
bring your tired masses to us and, you know, lighten your load. Right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, that market has taken off so dramatically, and we see other camera manufacturers coming in there. You know, Nikon's pushing the D800 and the D600, and the 5Ds and the 6Ds are in there, even 7Ds. I think we do a pretty good job with the A99s and the A77s, but they're the same price point, the same size camera, the same kind of, you know, lens choice camera that you have in that range. And then when you bring it to this, it opens up the world, because now you have those features that an indie filmmaker is going to be looking for. You have the smaller body, easier to use, lighter, and then you also have the E-mount lens system, and that allows you then, you know, the biggest barrier, if everybody was fighting in the DSLR realm, the biggest barrier there is you invest in Canon lenses, you invest in Nikon lenses, you invest in Sony lenses, and once you're in that system, you don't really move out of it, because, you know, I've got a few $1,000s invested in lenses, and I don't want to switch those as well.
Absolutely.
You can take those other lenses and put them onto this camera with, you know, simple adapters.
So I was going to ask you about, because I'd heard about that you can adapt those. So I can take, because I have a bunch of Nikon glass at home, I could take that glass and I can adapt it and use it on this camera if I want it.
Absolutely. Now, there are limitations with some lenses. You know, because this camera doesn't have a screw drive, it uses an electronic control, and most of the newer lenses are coming out electronic control. So you can take this, for instance, we have a couple of adapters, the LAEA3 and the LAEA4. One is mirrorless, the other one actually has a mirror and a phase detection AF sensor built into it. So if I put the LAEA4 onto this, I can turn it into a fully fledged DSLR, essentially, with phase detection AF. In addition to that, then I can put on any of my you know, existing alpha lenses. So I have a full range of Zeiss lenses. I have a couple of G lenses. You know, that's, you know, a good $15,000 worth of lenses. but I could use all of that Zeiss and G glass on here with an adapter and fully function. I know that there are manufacturers out there that make smart adapters for electronic control that you can put on electronic Canon lenses that will have full functionality.
And Metabones make a smart adapter.
Right.
But the other thing is when you're shooting motion, and this is one of the biggest transitions for a photographer mindset, is that we tend to turn everything off and have everything manually. So I love using Nikon lenses, or I have ZF lenses, or I have my PL positive lock film lenses.
Yeah.
Everything's manual iris, because what you're doing is you're setting the iris to create the depth of field you want in a scene. And then you're using variable neutral density filters or matte boxes with filtration on the lens to control the light. Because if you're shooting at 24 frames a second, you want to set your shutter to 1/50th. I mean, that's very low for photography standards.
Right.
But to get good sense of motion and persistence of motion in filmmaking, your shutter's always set at 1/50th. And your iris is set to create the depth of field. So to control the amount of illumination coming into the lens, you need to create a barrier using neutral density filters.
You gotta block it, yeah.
So some of the older Nikon lenses, some of the Zeiss lenses, are perfect for filmmaking. Right. So if you're looking to kind of transition into a different format, and maybe you've not used the Sony before, but this is really appealing. There's no downside. I mean, you spend a few $100s on buying some adapters, either adapt the lenses just with a ring. I think Novoflex make rings, and then there's Photodiox, and then you've got manufacturers like Metabones who make the Canon adapter, which will transfer the lens information through to the sensor. Yeah. And then you've got Nikon adapters, MTF services make a lot of adapters. They're very inexpensive. And so you're not losing anything with
that excuse is gone. The excuse of I can't move. So you can enjoy all the stuff that you've been talking about with your existing glass. Yeah. So last question, and I know Mike, you probably can't answer this, but when and how much? Because everybody's watching this. They're like, okay, all right, you got me. I want to go get it.
Right. So we haven't settled on a price yet. This is obviously something that we're keen, and I would say it's going to be affordable, definitely for the indie filmmakers. I can't imagine it being way out of range with what's in the market already. And then secondly, Sony soon only, not yet. So I think it'll be soon. Yeah. We just can't tell you yet.
Got it.
Yes. So stand by. I think it'll we'll make an announcement pretty soon.
Well, the fact that you have a working camera in your hands and then was shooting with it.
I shot for
a working DP.
Yes.
I shot for about 9 days on it. Yeah. So we've shot it in Scotland, we shot it in Japan, we shot 4K, we shot 2K. Yeah. It's nearly there. I mean, from an operational point of view, and I mean I don't know what the situation is with the engineers and factories and stuff, but certainly we had 4 units on location, and they're all functioning to different degrees. I mean, pre-production models are always a little bit skitty, but we produced beautiful work that went straight through post no problem and has been displayed today and will be on the booth. So if you're looking to get some information on it, then there'll be plenty of stuff online, I'm guessing, by the end of the week.
It'll be everywhere,
sure. Including this, right?
Yeah.
Well, El-Deane, if people want to find this camera and dig into it before it's officially released, where do you suggest they go to learn about it?
Right now there's, I just released information today to all our retailers in the US and all the media, so I'm guessing there's going to be a slew of media coverage by tomorrow this time. But Sony.com is a good place to start. Most of our retailers, I think probably most of the information that'll be available right now is going to be on Sony.net.
Got it.
So that's a good place to go to, is Sony.net.
Sony.net. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And Dan, what's next for you? Where would you like people to go to see some of the stuff you're working on?
I've just released a blog post today on my blog at fstopacademy.com showing the actual film we made in Scotland with the behind-the-scenes film. Once I get a decent internet connection in Las Vegas, I'll upload the 4K stuff to YouTube. So we're going to put on YouTube, Vimeo. You can find me at fstopacademy.com. I'm here all week actually talking on the Zeiss booth about another project I worked on. And then I've got other projects lined up with Sony with new products in the future, and I'm taking a vacation next week with my wife.
Oh, look at that!
Because I've been away a lot recently.
Relationship maintenance, very good.
I know, yeah, it's crazy, huh?
Very good.
I need to do that when I get there.
Yeah, right.
All right, guys. Well, thanks both of you for coming on and doing this. I mean, it's an honor coming on right on the heels. I know you were like hair on fire trying to get ready to launch
Yep,
this thing.
yeah.
So getting you into this room was a coup in and of itself. So thank you for coming on. Den, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
You know, one of the people, the first people to get their hands on this thing. So this whole thing was very good. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, guys, that's it. You know what we know about the new Sony A7S. You know, like they said, go check out the sites and form your own opinion. See you soon.
Sony.